young Comanche warrior collapses, his breath stolen by battle wounds, and the only person who might save him is a white woman who was once enslaved by his people. What she does next will change both their fates forever. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The year was 1858, and the vast expanse of the Texas frontier stretched out like an endless sea of golden grass beneath the merciless summer sun. Fort Davis, a recently established military outpost, stood as a lonely sentinel against the untamed wilderness. Among the soldiers stationed there was Lieutenant James Harrison, a man whose piercing blue eyes had seen too much death during his short 28 years. Harrison had been ordered to lead a small patrol to investigate reports of Comanche activity near the Davis Mountains. The Comanche, known as the Lords of the Plains, were formidable warriors whose horsemanship was unmatched by any other tribe. Their raids had become increasingly bold, and the army was determined to protect the growing number of settlers moving west. As the patrol made camp by a stream on their third night out, Harrison sat alone, staring into the dancing flames of their small fire. His thoughts drifted to Elizabeth Walker, the beautiful daughter of a Boston merchant who had promised to wait for his return. He touched the locket containing her portrait that hung around his neck, a silent prayer on his lips. "Lieutenant," called Sergeant Miller, interrupting his reverie. "The men are restless. They say there's signs of Comanche all around us." Harrison nodded grimly. "Double the watch tonight. I don't want any surprises." Little did he know that less than 5 miles away, in a hidden canyon, young Hawk, the 20-year-old son of Comanche Chief Spotted Wolf, was preparing for his first raid as a war leader. His father had finally granted him the honor after years of training, and young Hawk was determined to prove himself worthy. At his side was his cousin, Strong Bear, who whispered, "The soldiers' horses would make fine additions to our herd." Young Hawk nodded, his dark eyes reflecting the same fire that burned in their own small camp. "Tomorrow," he said simply. What neither the soldiers nor the Comanche knew was that a third party moved silently through the night. A lone woman with hair the color of wheat and skin, burned golden by the sun, tracked carefully along the ridge above the soldiers' camp. Sarah Callahan had been taken captive by the Comanche 3 years earlier, when they raided her family's homestead. At 19, she had adapted to survive among them, learning their language and ways, but never forgetting where she came from. After the death of the elderly medicine woman who had protected her, Sarah had fled the tribe 2 months ago. She now lived a solitary existence, moving like a ghost between the worlds of white settlers and native tribes, belonging to neither. Her knowledge of both worlds gave her an advantage few possessed, but it also left her utterly alone. As dawn broke over the Texas landscape, Harrison's patrol continued their journey through a narrow pass. The lieutenant felt uneasy, the hairs on the back of his neck standing at attention. "Spread out," he ordered. "Something's not right." His instincts proved correct. From the rocky slopes came war cries as young Hawk and 15 Comanche warriors descended upon them. Arrows flew through the air, finding their marks with deadly precision. "Defensive positions!" Harrison shouted, drawing his revolver as chaos erupted around him. Horses reared and men fell. The sound of gunshots echoed off the canyon walls. Young Hawk charged directly at Harrison. His lance aimed at the lieutenant's chest. Harrison fired, the bullet grazing the young warrior's shoulder, but failing to stop his advance. The lance pierced Harrison's side, and he fell from his horse, blood staining the dusty ground beneath him. As young Hawk prepared to deliver a final blow, a rifle shot cracked through the air. The young Comanche felt a burning pain in his leg and tumbled from his pony. Looking up, he caught a glimpse of golden hair on the ridge above. A woman holding a rifle, now taking aim at another warrior. "Retreat!" Strong Bear called out, seeing that the element of surprise was lost. The Comanche gathered their wounded, including young Hawk, and disappeared back into the hills as quickly as they had appeared. Sarah watched from her position as the remaining soldiers tended to their wounded. 3 men lay dead, and several others, including Lieutenant Harrison, were badly injured. She knew the nearest help was at Fort Davis, a day's ride away. These men would not survive without immediate assistance. Making a decision that would alter the course of many lives, Sarah descended from her hiding place and approached the soldiers with her hands raised. "Don't shoot," she called out. "I'm Sarah Callahan. I can help your wounded." Sergeant Miller aimed his rifle at her, suspicion in his eyes. "You're white, but you're dressed like an Indian. How do we know you're not with them?" "I was taken by the Comanche 3 years ago," she explained calmly. "I escaped. Now your lieutenant is bleeding out. Let me help him, or he'll be dead before sundown." Miller hesitated, then lowered his weapon. "Do what you can." Sarah knelt beside Harrison, examining the wound. It was deep, but the lance had missed his vital organs. "I need clean cloths, water, and whiskey if you have it," she instructed. As she worked to clean and bind Harrison's wound, their eyes met. Despite his pain, he was struck by the quiet strength in her gaze. "Why are you helping us?" he managed to ask through gritted teeth. Sarah's hands never stopped their work as she replied, "Because I haven't forgotten who I am, Lieutenant, even if everyone else has." 2 weeks had passed since the ambush, and Lieutenant James Harrison found himself recovering slowly in a small cabin on the outskirts of Fort Davis. The Army doctor had been amazed at Sarah's skillful treatment of his wounds, declaring that her knowledge of native herbs and traditional medicine had likely saved his life. Though still weak, Harrison had insisted on being moved from the crowded infirmary to this more private lodging, where Sarah continued to care for him under the doctor's supervision. "You should rest more," Sarah admonished, as she entered with fresh bandages and a steaming cup of herbal tea. "Your body needs time to heal." Harrison sat up straighter in his bed, wincing slightly. "I've been resting for 2 weeks. I'm beginning to forget what it feels like to stand upright." Sarah placed the cup on the small table beside him. "Drink this, it will help with the pain." As she changed his bandages, Harrison studied her face. The sun had left freckles across her nose and cheeks, and tiny lines around her eyes spoke of both laughter and hardship. Despite the rough frontier clothing she wore, there was an unmistakable grace in her movements. "Tell me about your time with the Comanche," he said softly. Sarah's hands paused momentarily before continuing their work. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How you survived, what you learned, how you escaped." She was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I survived because I chose to. After they killed my parents and brother, I could have given up, but something in me refused to die." Her voice was steady, but Harrison could sense the pain beneath her words. "An old medicine woman took me under her protection. She taught me their language, their healing ways. In return, I helped her gather plants and prepare remedies. The tribe called me Yellow Hair. I was never fully accepted, but I was tolerated because of her." "And your escape?" Harrison prompted. "The old woman died this past winter. Without her protection," Sarah shrugged. "I waited until the right moment and took a horse. I've been on my own since then." Meanwhile, in the Comanche camp hidden deep in the Davis Mountains, young Hawk sat outside his father's lodge, his injured leg stretched before him. Though the wound was healing, his pride had suffered a more severe injury. His first raid as a leader had ended in failure, with 2 warriors dead and several others wounded. Chief Spotted Wolf emerged from the lodge, his weathered face unreadable as he sat beside his son. "The wound heals well," he observed. "The shame does not," young Hawk replied, his voice bitter. "I failed you, father." The chief was silent for a moment, watching the life of the camp continue around them. Women preparing hides, children playing, warriors tending to horses. "A warrior is not measured by a single battle, my son, but by how he rises after falling." Young Hawk's gaze drifted to the mountains in the distance. "The woman with yellow hair, the one who shot me. I have seen her before. She lived among the northern band with the old medicine woman." "The captive woman?" Spotted Wolf's expression darkened. "She has sided with the blue coats." "I will find her," young Hawk declared. "And the soldier leader she saved. Their deaths will restore my honor." Spotted Wolf placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Vengeance clouds judgment, young Hawk. Wisdom must guide strength." But young Hawk had already made his decision. As soon as his leg healed enough to ride, he would track down the yellow-haired woman and the soldier. His honor demanded it. Back at Fort Davis, Sarah had ventured into town for supplies. The small settlement that had sprung up around the fort consisted of a general store, a saloon, and a handful of rough-hewn buildings. As she selected bandages and herbs, She was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed her. "That's her, the one who lived with the savages," she overheard a woman murmur to her companion. "Probably gone Indian herself," the other replied. "Can't trust her kind." Sarah kept her face impassive, though the words stung. She paid for her purchases and hurried back toward Harrison's cabin, only to be intercepted by Colonel William Fletcher, the fort's commanding officer. "Miss Callahan," he called, approaching her with a formal nod. "A word, if you please." Sarah stopped, clutching her packages. "Colonel, I want to express my gratitude for saving Lieutenant Harrison's life," he said, his tone clipped and professional. "The Army is in your debt." "No debt is necessary, Colonel. I did what anyone would have done." Fletcher's gray eyebrows rose slightly. "Perhaps, but your unique knowledge proved invaluable. Which brings me to a proposition." He cleared his throat. "I'd like to employ you as a scout and interpreter. Your familiarity with Comanche ways could help prevent further bloodshed." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face because the colonel added, "It would also provide you with a legitimate position here. Protection. A fresh start." She understood the unspoken message. Without such a position, her place in the community would remain uncertain, tenuous at best. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "Do that," Fletcher nodded. "And Miss Callahan, Lieutenant Harrison speaks highly of you." "Very highly indeed." Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks as she took her leave of the colonel. Her feelings for James Harrison had grown during the weeks of his recovery, though she had tried to keep them in check. He was an educated man from a good family, with prospects and a future. She was a woman with no home, no family, and a past that made her an outcast in polite society. And yet, when he looked at her, none of that seemed to matter. When she returned to the cabin, she found Harrison standing, somewhat unsteadily, by the window. He turned at her entrance, a smile lighting his pale face. "The doctor said I could try walking today," he explained, moving carefully toward her. "My legs seem to have forgotten their purpose." Sarah hurried to his side, supporting him as he wavered. "You shouldn't be doing this alone." "I'm not alone now," he replied softly, his hand covering hers where it rested against his arm. Their eyes met, and for a moment everything else faded away. The pain of the past, the uncertainty of the future. Then Harrison stumbled slightly, breaking the spell, and Sarah guided him back to his chair. "Colonel Fletcher offered me a position as a scout," she said as she unpacked her supplies. Harrison's expression brightened. "That's excellent news. Will you accept?" "I haven't decided. The fort isn't exactly welcoming to someone with my history." Harrison reached for her hand, holding it firmly in his own. "Then we'll change that, Sarah, together." Outside the cabin window, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Neither of them noticed the lone figure watching from the distant ridge, a Comanche warrior, his leg newly healed, studying the cabin with dark, determined eyes. The dusty streets of Fort Davis bustled with activity as autumn approached. 3 months had passed since the ambush, and both Lieutenant Harrison and Sarah Callahan had settled into new rhythms. Harrison had returned to active duty, though he was assigned to administrative tasks while his wound completed its healing. Sarah had accepted the position as scout and interpreter, earning a modest salary that allowed her to rent a small room behind the general store. On this particular morning, they walked together toward the fort's headquarters, their conversation light, despite the serious nature of their meeting with Colonel Fletcher. "The settlers near Limpia Creek are nervous," Sarah explained. "They've reported seeing smoke signals in the hills." Harrison nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think it's Young Hawk's band?" "Possibly. He's been quiet these past months, but the Comanche never forget what they consider a debt of honor." She hesitated before adding, "And I shot him." "You saved my life," Harrison reminded her, his hand brushing hers briefly before withdrawing. These small touches had become more frequent between them, each one charged with unspoken feelings. Colonel Fletcher was waiting for them in his office, maps spread across his desk. With him was Captain Thomas Reed, a newly arrived officer whose reputation for harsh treatment of native tribes had preceded him. "Lieutenant Miss Callahan," Fletcher greeted them. "Captain Reed will be leading a patrol to investigate the reports from Limpia Creek. I want you both to accompany him. Harrison for your knowledge of the terrain, and Miss Callahan for your expertise regarding Comanche movements. Captain Reed's cold eyes assessed Sarah, his displeasure evident. With all due respect, Colonel, I don't see the value in bringing a woman along, particularly one with her associations. Sarah met his gaze steadily but remained silent. Miss Callahan's associations, as you put it, are precisely why she's invaluable, Harrison interjected, his voice carrying an edge. Her understanding of Comanche tactics has already saved lives. Fletcher nodded. Lieutenant Harrison is correct. This is not open for discussion, Captain. You leave at dawn tomorrow. Dismissed. As they left the headquarters, Harrison could see the tension in Sarah's shoulders. Don't let Reed bother you, he said quietly. His type is becoming obsolete out here. His type is exactly why there's constant bloodshed, Sarah replied. He sees no difference between a peaceful negotiation and a war party. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Sarah sat alone outside her small room, mending a tear in her riding skirt. Her thoughts were interrupted by approaching footsteps, and she looked up to see James Harrison, now dressed in civilian clothes. I hope I'm not intruding, he said, holding up a small bundle. I brought coffee beans from the officers' stores, better than what they sell at the general store. Sarah smiled, setting aside her sewing. Never an intrusion, and real coffee is worth its weight in gold out here. He sat beside her on the rough-hewn bench, their shoulders nearly touching. For a few moments they sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I've been meaning to ask you something, Harrison finally said, his voice unusually hesitant. When this patrol is over, would you consider joining me for dinner? At my quarters? Sarah's heart quickened, but uncertainty shadowed her features. James, you know what people say about me, and you know I don't care, he replied firmly. These past months, you've become, he paused, searching for the right words, important to me, very important. Before she could respond, a commotion from the direction of the fort drew their attention. A rider was galloping toward the commander's quarters, clearly bearing urgent news. Something's happened, Harrison said, rising quickly. Wait here. But Sarah was already on her feet. I'm coming with you. They reached the headquarters just as Colonel Fletcher emerged, his face grave. Lieutenant, Miss Callahan. Good. You're both here. A settler family has been attacked 10 miles south of Limpia Creek. The husband was killed, and the wife and child are missing. Comanche? Harrison asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes, and there's more. The bodies of 2 soldiers were found nearby. They'd been scouting the area. Fletcher's gaze fixed on Sarah. One of them lived long enough to describe the leader. Young Hawk. Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. He's making his move. Captain Reed is assembling his patrol now. You'll leave immediately rather than waiting for morning, Fletcher ordered. Within the hour, Sarah found herself riding alongside Harrison and 20 soldiers, Captain Reed at the lead. The night was clear, a full moon illuminating their path across the rugged landscape. We'll find them, Harrison assured her quietly as they rode, the woman and child. Sarah nodded, but her eyes continually scanned the shadows. She knew young Hawk would not have taken captives without purpose. This was a message, or worse, a trap. As dawn broke, they reached the burned-out remains of the settler's cabin. The scene was grim, the body of the farmer already removed by neighbors. Reed organized search parties while Harrison and Sarah examined the ground around the homestead. Here, Sarah called, kneeling beside some tracks. They headed west, toward the mountains, not north to the main Comanche territories. Reed approached, his expression skeptical. And how do you know these aren't false trails? Because I know young Hawk, Sarah replied evenly. He wants us to follow. That's why he took the woman and child instead of killing them outright. Savages, Reed muttered. We'll pursue immediately. It's what he expects, Harrison warned. We should send for reinforcements. And let those captives suffer longer? No. Reed's tone brooked no argument. We move now. As they followed the trail into increasingly rough terrain, Sarah rode closer to Harrison. This feels wrong, she whispered. Young Hawk is leading us somewhere specific. Harrison nodded grimly. I know, but Reed won't listen until it's too late. By midday, they had entered a narrow canyon, the trail becoming more defined rather than fading, another warning sign that Sarah recognized all too well. She was about to call out to Reed when a movement caught her eye, a flash of color among the rocks above. "Ambush!" she shouted, just as war cries filled the air and arrows rained down upon them. Chaos erupted as warriors emerged from hidden positions. Harrison pulled Sarah behind a boulder, as gunfire and arrows flew in all directions. Reed was shouting orders, but his voice was drowned out by the sounds of battle. Through the dust and confusion, Sarah caught sight of young Hawk on the ridge above, identifiable by the distinctive eagle feather in his hair. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw recognition flare in his face. "There," she pointed. "That's young Hawk." Harrison followed her gaze, raising his rifle. But before he could take aim, a group of warriors charged their position. Harrison fired, downing one, then drew his revolver as they closed in. Sarah had her own pistol ready, a small derringer she kept for protection. When a warrior leaped toward them, she fired, her shot catching him in the shoulder. He fell back, but another took his place. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, gunfire erupted from the canyon entrance. A second patrol from Fort Davis had arrived, having been sent by Colonel Fletcher as reinforcements despite Reed's objections. The battle shifted as the Comanche, now caught between two forces, began to withdraw. Young Hawk shouted commands in his native tongue, and his warriors melted back into the rocks and brush. In the sudden lull, Sarah realized something. The woman and child, they must be nearby. Young Hawk wouldn't have taken them far. Harrison nodded. "Can you track them?" "Yes, but we need to go now, while the warriors are occupied." Without waiting for permission from Reed, they slipped away from the main battle, following a faint trail that Sarah detected leading up a narrow side canyon. The sounds of fighting faded behind them as they climbed, moving as quietly as possible. At the top of a steep incline, they found a small cave. Outside, tethered to a scrubby tree, was a pony, confirmation that someone was inside. "Stay behind me," Harrison whispered, drawing his revolver. They approached cautiously, and Harrison called out, "Mrs. Brooks? Emma Brooks, we're from Fort Davis." A frightened voice answered from within. "Who's there? Please help us." Harrison entered first with Sarah close behind. In the dim light of the cave, they could make out a woman clutching a small boy of about 4 years. Both looked terrified, but unharmed. "Lieutenant James Harrison, ma'am, and this is Sarah Callahan. We're here to take you home." Relief flooded the woman's face, but it quickly turned to alarm as a shadow filled the cave entrance. Sarah spun around to find young Hawk standing there, his rifle aimed directly at Harrison. "Yellow hair," young Hawk said in English, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "You betrayed our people." "They were never my people," Sarah replied in Comanche, "just as I was never truly one of them." Young Hawk's gaze shifted briefly to Harrison. "This man is why you left. For a blue coat?" "I left because I didn't belong," Sarah answered, taking a small step forward. "Just as you don't belong on this path of vengeance. Your father seeks peace." A flicker of doubt crossed young Hawk's features. "My honor demands their blood." "And what will blood bring but more blood?" Sarah challenged. "The soldiers have reinforcements. Your warriors are retreating. End this now while you still can." Harrison stood motionless, his revolver still in his hand, but not raised. He understood enough Comanche to follow their exchange, and he knew that Sarah was their only hope of resolving this without further bloodshed. For what seemed an eternity, young Hawk remained poised to fire. Then, slowly, he lowered his rifle. "Take them," he said finally, his voice hard but resigned. "But know this, Yellow Hair, our paths will cross again." With that, he backed out of the cave and disappeared into the rocks above. The winter of 1858 settled over Fort Davis like a quiet blanket, softening the harsh lines of the military outpost and the surrounding landscape. December brought cooler temperatures to the Texas frontier, though nothing like the harsh winters of the Northern Territories. For Sarah Callahan, it was a time of unexpected peace after months of tension following the rescue of Emma Brooks and her son. Captain Reed had been furious when Sarah and Lieutenant Harrison returned to the battle scene with the rescued captives, having acted without his orders. He had demanded Sarah's dismissal as a scout, claiming insubordination. But Colonel Fletcher, impressed by their successful rescue, and the fact that they had resolved the confrontation with young Hawk without further bloodshed, had not only retained Sarah but promoted Harrison to captain. Now, as Sarah made her way through the fort's main gate, a light shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill, she reflected on how much had changed in the 5 months since she had first approached the wounded soldiers after the ambush. She had gone from a solitary wanderer, trusted by no one, to a respected interpreter and scout, with a place, however tenuous, in the community. And then there was James. Their relationship had deepened steadily. Despite the disapproving glances and whispered comments from some of the officers' wives and townspeople, the dinner he had invited her to before the Limpia Creek incident had become the first of many private meals shared in his quarters, each one bringing them closer. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted as she reached the headquarters building and found James waiting for her on the porch, dressed in his formal uniform. "You look very official this morning, Captain," she greeted him with a smile. Harrison's eyes warmed as they took in her appearance. Sarah had made concessions to town life, replacing her frontier buckskins with a simple blue cotton dress, though she still wore practical boots beneath the hem. "Colonel Fletcher requested we both attend this meeting," he explained, offering his arm. "The Indian agent has arrived from Austin with news." Inside Fletcher's office, they found the colonel in conversation with a thin, bespectacled man, who was introduced as Mr. Howard Thornton, the newly appointed Indian agent for the region. Also present was Emma Brooks, the woman they had rescued, now recovered from her ordeal and living in town until she decided her future. "Miss Callahan, Captain Harrison." Fletcher nodded. "Please sit. Mr. Thornton brings important developments." The agent cleared his throat nervously. "As you may know, the federal government has been attempting to establish more permanent peace with the Comanche bands. I've just returned from a meeting with several chiefs, including Spotted Wolf." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Young Hawk's father?" "Yes." Thornton adjusted his spectacles. "It seems the incident at Limpia Creek was not sanctioned by the chief. Young Hawk acted against his father's wishes. That explains why he withdrew rather than continuing the fight," Harrison commented. "What's Spotted Wolf's position now?" "He seeks peace," Thornton replied. "He's agreed to keep his band within designated hunting grounds north of here, in exchange for regular supplies from the government. But he has one specific condition." The agent's eyes fixed on Sarah. "He wishes to meet with the one his people call Yellow Hair." A heavy silence filled the room. "Out of the question," Harrison said firmly. "After what happened with young Hawk—" "James," Sarah interrupted gently. "This could be important." Fletcher studied her thoughtfully. "Miss Callahan, no one would require you to meet with the chief. It's entirely your decision." Sarah considered for a moment, weighing the risks against the potential benefits of establishing better relations with Spotted Wolf's band. "I'll do it," she said finally. "But not alone. I'll accompany her," Harrison declared, his tone making it clear this was non-negotiable. "As will I." Emma Brooks spoke up unexpectedly. All eyes turned to her in surprise. "The Comanche killed my husband," she continued, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "But they spared my son and me. I need to understand why, if I'm ever to find peace." 2 days later, a small party departed Fort Davis for the meeting place Thornton had arranged, a neutral location near a spring halfway between the fort and the Comanche hunting grounds. Sarah, Harrison, Emma, and Thornton rode with a small military escort, their breath visible in the cool morning air. "Are you certain about this?" Harrison asked Sarah quietly as they rode side by side. "No," she admitted, "but necessary things rarely come with certainty." He reached across the space between their horses, briefly taking her gloved hand in his. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The meeting site came into view around midday, a cluster of cottonwood trees surrounding a small spring. Already waiting were Spotted Wolf, 3 of his sub-chiefs, and a small group of warriors. Young Hawk was noticeably absent. As they dismounted, Sarah felt a familiar tension creep along her spine, the sensation of straddling 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither. She straightened her shoulders and stepped forward as Spotted Wolf approached. "Yellow Hair," the chief greeted her in Comanche. "You have changed since you lived among us." "As have you, Chief Spotted Wolf," she replied in the same language. "The winters leave their mark on us all." A ghost of a smile touched the chief's weathered face. "You speak truth. Let us talk then of the changes that must come." The negotiations proceeded slowly, with Sarah translating for both sides. Spotted Wolf was direct. He wanted peace, but on terms that allowed his people dignity and sufficient hunting grounds to sustain themselves. The government, through Thornton, offered regular distributions of food, blankets, and tools in exchange for an end to raids on settlements and stagecoach routes. Throughout the discussions, Emma Brooks sat quietly, her gaze occasionally meeting that of the Comanche women who had accompanied the chief's party. There was no hostility in these exchanges, only a shared understanding of loss and endurance that transcended the barriers of language and culture. As the afternoon waned, Spotted Wolf addressed a question directly to Harrison. "My son believes you stole Yellowhair's heart from our people. Is this true?" Harrison, understanding the question through Sarah's translation, looked directly at the chief. "I believe hearts cannot be stolen, only freely given. Sarah Callahan has chosen her own path." The chief studied Harrison for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You speak with a straight tongue. This is good." He turned back to Sarah. "Young Hawk has been sent to our northern cousins. He will learn patience there and wisdom. When he returns, his blood will be cooler." "Thank you," Sarah said sincerely. "I never wished him harm." As they prepared to conclude the meeting, Emma Brooks suddenly stepped forward. Through Sarah, she addressed the chief. "I want to know why you spared my son and me when you took us." Spotted Wolf's expression remained impassive. "The taking of a child's mother is like taking the sun from the sky. We are warriors, not child killers." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she held herself proudly. "My husband? He fought to protect you. He died as a warrior. There is no shame in this." The simple dignity of the exchange seemed to give Emma a measure of the peace she sought. She nodded once, then stepped back. As the Comanche mounted their horses to depart, Spotted Wolf paused beside Sarah. "The path between two worlds is never easy, Yellowhair, but sometimes it is the only path that leads to tomorrow." His gaze shifted to Harrison. "Take care of her, Blue Coat. She carries medicine in her heart." With that cryptic message, the chief rode away with his people, leaving Sarah and Harrison standing together in the fading light of the winter afternoon. The return journey to Fort Davis was made in companionable silence, each member of the party absorbed in their own thoughts. For Sarah, the meeting had brought an unexpected sense of closure. She had feared Spotted Wolf would view her as a traitor, but instead, he had acknowledged her choice with a wisdom that transcended the conflict between their peoples. As the lights of the fort appeared in the distance, Harrison guided his horse closer to Sarah's. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly. With peace established, Fletcher may not need an interpreter as often. Sarah turned to him, reading the unspoken question in his eyes. "What are you really asking me, James?" He smiled slightly. "I'm asking if you might consider a more permanent arrangement, such as becoming Mrs. James Harrison." Sarah reined her horse to a stop, her heart suddenly racing faster than during any battlefield encounter. "James, you know who I am. What people think, I know exactly who you are," he interrupted gently. "You're the woman who saved my life, who bridges two worlds with courage and compassion, and who has completely captured my heart. The rest is just noise." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold ring with a modest pearl. "I've been carrying this since we returned from Limpia Creek. I was waiting for the right moment." Sarah stared at the ring, then at the man offering it. In his eyes, she saw not just love, but understanding, respect, and the promise of a future where she would no longer have to walk alone between worlds. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Yes, I'll marry you, James Harrison." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, bridging the distance between fort and wilderness, between past and future. And in that moment, Sarah Callahan, once captive, then wanderer, found that she had at last come home. Spring came early to Fort Davis in 1859. The April wedding of Captain James Harrison and Sarah Callahan was a modest affair, attended by Colonel Fletcher, Emma Brooks and her son, and a handful of soldiers and townspeople whose respect Sarah had earned through her work. Among the gifts they received was a beaded medicine pouch, delivered by a Comanche messenger from Spotted Wolf. Inside was a note written in careful English. For yellow hair and blue coat, may your path be strong, your children many, and your winters warm with peace. As Sarah stood beside her husband on the porch of their new home, watching the sun set over the mountains where she had once wandered alone, she felt young Hawk's prophecy had indeed come true. Their paths had crossed again, but in a way none of them could have imagined. Through understanding rather than vengeance, through healing rather than harm, they had all found a new beginning. And as James's arm encircled her waist, drawing her close against the evening chill, Sarah knew that the son of the Comanche had stopped breathing that day in the canyon, only to be given a new life, one where the yellow-haired woman once enslaved by his people had indeed brought him back to life, in more ways than one.